Welcome back to Benny's Custom Works, proudly supported by Valvoline and Sparesbox. Don't forget BCW5 on checkout. This week's a pretty special week. Down here at BCW, we've got a brand new car to show you guys. This is my 1990 Subaru Rex. Now it's a Japanese domestic market only vehicle. We've imported this one recently into Australia via the guys at Iron Chef Imports. As always, those guys are really helpful. This is about the third or fourth car I brought in through them, and each time it's been pretty much seamless, so shout out to those guys for their help. But anyway, this is, as I've already mentioned, a 1990 Rex. Now, for those of you that are possibly familiar with Australian K cars or Australian footprint sized K cars, because technically a lot of Australian K cars don't actually meet K requirements because of engine size. In Australia, the sister car of this is a Subaru Fiore. So in Australia, we got this as they called them either a fun car or a handy van, depending on sort of the marketing of the time. And Australian only models were basically imported under a loophole that they were a commercial vehicle. So it meant that they had no back seat. They were super bare as far as accessories and I guess options go. Whereas this thing's kind of the other end of the spectrum, where the JDM version now has full body kit. It's a similar engine as far as the family of the engine. So it's an EN family engine, which is an inline four, and the biggest capacity you could get was about 800 cc's, and they started at about 500. This particular one is a 658 cc, so it just scrapes in under the K-Car 660 cap. But this one is a little bit special because 99% of forced induction K-Cars are turboed, whereas the Rex, the Vivio, and the Plio all were supercharged. So anyone who's seen the little AMR 300 superchargers for sale on eBay, this is what they actually originally came from. So it's a little bit different. There's sort of all sorts of quirky stuff going on in the engine bay. And a friend of mine who has a Toyota Crown, the supercharged 1G variant, he actually had a look in the engine bay and started pointing out parts which were identical to his Crown. Some of the air control solenoids and things like that have been clearly pulled from the Toyota parts bin. And interestingly, a lot of the engine management actually looks like it's all Denso, whereas at the time, Subaru predominantly were using JECS engine management stuff. So it's interesting to see that this particular setup is completely different from anything that Subaru was doing at the time. And I'd say they've probably just outsourced a lot of the stuff in this car because it's cheaper to use someone else's gear than to try and re-engineer everything yourself. And yeah, possibly JECS didn't have an offering of the time, but yeah, it's really cool to see some of the technology that's in this and the fact that they've managed to cram it into such a small package, and also just the styling of it. It's so much more aggressive than an Australian Fiore. Like the front bar is completely different. We've got side skirts. The rear bar is different. We've got a wing, and also the interior is completely different. The dash and the door moldings are about the only common parts. But in saying that, the dash and the door moldings in the Australian car are grey, whereas this is black. Going through the interior, there's tons of completely different stuff. We're going to kind of get inside it and do a bit of a breakdown. Then we're going to actually go and take it for a drive. So let's keep on trucking. I thought we'd move into the interior and kind of get a bit more of a detailed breakdown of, I guess, what's in this versus what's not in the Australian car. There are a lot of differences. Like I said before, the interior colour of this is different. So factory, the Fiore in Australia would have had an all grey dash. Interestingly, the JDM variant has A-pillar trims, which is pretty fancy. Still nothing along the top of the roof. They're still pretty bare. But yeah, where it sort of starts to get interesting is things like we've got aircon, this little sort of tidy tray. That was an option of the time, and it's pretty cool to see this one actually has it. We've got lower door trims with door pockets. And the dash cluster is completely different. So the Australian delivered one literally just has a speedo, a temp gauge, and a fuel gauge, whereas now we've got things like a tacho. There's a cool little thing in the middle that kind of is a silhouette of a car, I guess you could say, and it's got the word supercharger on it, and as soon as it comes on boost, you actually get this little sort of supercharger insignia lights up when it's on boost only, so that's pretty cool. From memory, the Cappuccino actually had something similar to that too, where it had a boost light as opposed to a boost gauge. I don't know if that's maybe like an economy thing where you try not to bring the light on or what, but yeah, I've sort of noticed that in a few different K cars over the years that they've got some sort of little quirky boost light or a bit of a novelty. One thing that's worth mentioning is there's no radio in it. That's super common for cars in Japan when you're buying them via the auction system for them to pull any aftermarket stuff out of the car. So yeah, radios generally don't come in a car. I mean, something that's this old, this is 31 years old now, so trying to find an original radio is pretty much non-existent. We'll probably do just a pretty basic stereo in it. I think I don't really want to get too crazy into modifying this thing. It does have a Nardi steering wheel. I don't know if it was like a factory fit accessory of the time, because this Nardi is very similar to other Subaru Nardis of the time, so I don't know if maybe it was a dealer option or maybe someone's fitted it later. But yeah, I think it suits the interior really well. Black leather. It's got pretty minimal wear on it, so it is possible that it's the original one for the car. The odometer shows 47,000 Ks, but it is worth mentioning that it's only a 5-digit odometer, so I don't know if maybe it's ticked over and done a whole lap. But in saying that, the seats are in amazingly good condition. They are actually separating at the seams in spots, but they're not worn, so I think potentially it actually only has 47,000 Ks on it. There's a few lube stickers around, and all of those kind of say 44 or 54 or whatever thousand kilometers on them, as opposed to 154. But in saying that, the guys doing the service work are only going to be putting what's on the cluster and then adding the next service interval to it. So it's, while it's possibly giving it some sort of extra backing that the Ks are 47, you can't rely on it. I do have a dereg paper for it somewhere, but I haven't even thought to look at the Ks, to be honest, because the car presents really well. It's super neat for what it is, but yeah, it's pretty fun little thing. There's also other differences, like we've got a full center console here. The Australian delivered Fiore literally has nothing. Don't even have a shifter boot. It's just got a super basic rubber grommet in the floor factory. But the biggest difference of all, sort of between the Australian delivered and the JDM version, is in the back. So I'm going to pull the seats forward now and show you guys the back seat. This is really what sets the JDM Rex apart from the Aussie delivered Fiore, is this back seat area. As I mentioned before, the Aussie delivered ones had a super sparse little load bay, and it was just super cheap and easy to sort of produce. Whereas the JDM version has this fully molded plastic quarter trim. We've got speaker mounts. We've got a removable parcel shelf, which I also have, and amazingly it hasn't been cut for speakers, which I'm stoked about. But yeah, also we've got this split folding back seat. It has provision for headrests, but it has factory fitted plugs and the headrests have been removed. I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's a vision thing, because even looking in the rear vision mirror, there's not a lot of room to see out of. So potentially with a couple of headrests here, you've got even less vision. I also don't know how big of a person you'd probably try and put in the back of this, because by the time you actually get the seats into a comfortable position for the front seat passenger and driver, you've probably got about 300 mil of room, if that. So it's pretty snug in the back if you were trying to load it up with 4 people. It does obviously have seat belts front and back. The rear are just lap sash, so they're not retractable or anything, so you've got to manually adjust them, which is a little bit of a nostalgia trip actually seeing that, because it's probably 20 or 25 years since I've seen that sort of style of seat belt. But it's pretty cool. It's also worth mentioning too that this thing has the original spare wheel in it, which has never actually been fitted. The tyre is brand new, and where the nuts seat on the rim, that's completely untouched. Potentially more evidence to back up the kilometres of the car. The toolkit is actually not in the car, which I'm a little bit bummed about, but it may have been removed, and sometimes auction houses will ship that sort of stuff later. So potentially I can end up with a logbook, a spare key and a toolkit. But that sort of stuff is a bit of a lucky dip, and it's not something you should rely on when you are looking to buy an import, because maybe the auction house has it and sometimes they lose them. You've got to also keep in mind that the auction house is processing between sort of 7,000 to 10,000 cars per day on the big days. So trying to manage potentially 40 or 50,000 logbooks a week can become a bit of a mission. So don't necessarily rely on the fact, even if it's advertised as having a book when you purchase it, to actually be receiving it, because like I said, logistically it's a bit of a nightmare. Iron Chef do their absolute best to make sure that you do get all of that stuff, but it's also on the auction houses to make sure that they get it to the forwarder, which in this case was Iron Chef. But yeah, it's something pretty different, and I think we should go and take it for a drive. Now, anyone who's ever driven a K car, you'll know the interior is pretty noisy. It's almost like driving a sardine tin. It kind of is part of the charm, I feel. Like you kind of know what you're in for when you're getting one of these things. They're not the most luxurious or well sound deadened vehicles, but in saying that, it is pretty easy to give them a bit of a tune up and get some good quality sound deadening like car builders in. I mean, by doing the doors, the floor, and in some cases the roof. This one's a little bit hard because the headline is actually glued to the roof. But if you want to go to the effort of pulling it out and putting some sound deadening in for a sort of $400 or $500 spend, you can completely transform the acoustics and the interior and make it a much nicer place to be. I mean, I'm not going to be driving this thing from the one end of the country to the other, but I mean, some people do, and credit to them. But yeah, it's sort of rattly and pretty quirky, but inversely, you have that kind of pretty raw feeling of it. You get the engine noise, you've got the supercharger whine as well. Supercharger whining. Oh, that sounds so good now. And I think that's really cool because, like I touched on before, this is, well, the Subarus are really the only ones that supercharged their K cars. I think also some of the K trucks and vans, like the Sandbar, of the same sort of era were EN07 powered with the supercharger. So yeah, all of the Subaru lineup for a time was supercharged, whereas all the other forced injection K cars, to my knowledge, were all turbocharged. So yeah, it's something pretty different, a little bit quirky, and I guess that kind of goes on the Subaru sort of mantra as well, of being a little bit different and just not doing what everyone else is doing at the time. So yeah, pretty cool to sort of see some of the thought processes in the car. Driving it along, like I've driven this thing around town a few times now, and I'm starting to kind of notice a few little issues with it. Nothing major, and it's the sort of stuff you're going to find with buying any 30-year-old car, whether it's an import or not. The blinker stalk, I think I've actually broken it, to be honest, because the high beam detent doesn't work anymore. So every now and then, if you're driving it at night, the headlights will flick from low to high beam. So you're pretty much blinding everyone all the time. From what I can tell though, that light switch combination stalk is actually the same as an Australian delivered Fiore. And luckily I actually have a Fiore at the shop, which we can pull some bits off of. So yeah, potentially in a future episode we'll fix that. I also don't know how long the timing belt's been on the engine, if it's even been changed before. So we're going to be doing timing belt kit, water pump, bit of a service, do some spark plugs, do all the driveline fluids, and kind of get back to a zero. Anyone who's sort of familiar with the channel will know we pretty much do that with all the new cars as they come through the channel, because then we know where they're at as far as maintenance goes. So yeah, that'll be cool to kind of sort that out. The shifter bushes are a little bit clapped as well. Also really common for Subarus, especially this kind of era. So luckily they're still available genuine. I actually have them already on the shelf because they are common to other Subaru models. But yeah, we're gonna, in a future episode, we'll probably do all of that. The aircon also doesn't work. I believe it's because it's been degassed. A lot of imports, when they come into the country, they've been previously degassed. This Rex was an R12 car as well, which means it's the older style aircon gas. So that's going to require a retrofit. I doubt it's going to be something we're going to cover on the channel because aircon in Australia is not DIY at all. You cannot buy refrigerant. You cannot even really buy air conditioning parts unless you're licensed to do air conditioning. So yeah, I'm probably just going to outsource that to a shop that specialises in air conditioning because I'm not qualified myself to work on it. In New South Wales specifically, you have to have an extra air conditioning ticket on top of your mechanic's ticket. I'm not sure what other states are like, but yeah, in New South Wales, that's definitely something that you have to have. It's funny driving a car in top gear, doing 80 k's an hour, and you're already over 4,000 RPM on the tacho. In saying that though, the tacho does go all the way to 9, and I think the rev limiter is at about 7,800, 8,000 RPM. Not that I want to be sort of wringing this thing's neck its whole life, but it's good to have quite a usable power band in it. It's super nippy. Like I said, we're just cruising up on a hill now and just rolled on the throttle a little bit, and it's actually accelerating up the hill. We're actually in a 100 zone now, so I have been sort of cruising along a bit. It's cool to kind of be in one of these cars and have usable power. I mean, they're like 47 horsepower, 47 kilowatts at the flywheel from factory. so they don't have a lot of power, but when the thing weighs 600 kilos, it's a good usable power band, and it's a good usable amount of power. So it's cool to just be able to zip around in it, and yeah, it's super enjoyable to drive. It's not by any means underpowered. If anyone's driven the Australian version like a Fiore or even a Daihatsu Mira or a Seor or one of the later like L251 Charades, a lot of those kind of feel a little bit underpowered for what they are. Predominantly because Australia never got any of the forced induction variants of those cars. Same thing I think we touched on before. A lot of those cars came in as commercial vehicles as opposed to a passenger car. At the time, they were basically allowed in under a loophole of being a commercial vehicle. They didn't have to comply with the same safety regulations as a passenger car. Like, let's be real, if you're in one of these and you're in an accident, you're probably going to be in for a world of hurt. So with that in mind, I probably won't drive it around a lot. It is a little bit nerve-wracking driving this thing on the highway with trucks and things getting around you, but in saying that also, because this thing will happily do the highway speeds, you're not, chicane, you're not really in a lot of danger, whereas my old K truck, for those of you that remember that, or those of you that are new to the channel, check out my old Porter cab. We did a few little videos on that, lowering it and all sorts of stuff. But yeah, with that in mind, that thing was slow as, like, that was topped out at like 95 k's an hour, and all the trucks would go around you on the highway. I think I drove it on the highway once, and that was kind of enough. Super cool little truck. I loved owning it, but in all honesty, the biggest issue for me was the highway speeds, and where we're located, we're about an hour south of Sydney, so to kind of go anywhere you need to be on the highway at some point. So if I wanted to take that thing to a meet-up or just go down to Barrel Brothers or whatever like that, it was kind of a bit of a stretch to actually drive that on the road. Yeah, but it was a cool little car for what it was. But I think if I was to get another K truck, I'd get a much later model. Even like Marty's Tipper, that thing will happily do highway speeds. So yeah, I think that's also something to factor in if you are looking for a K car or a K truck or a K van, is that the older stuff is super cool, but it's also so slow. It's dangerously slow in my opinion. And actually, the newer the stuff you buy, the better it is for a safety point of view and as far as accident ratings go. But in saying that, it's personal preference. Some people literally buy these things to do cars and coffees, and it's 2 minutes from their house, and that's fine too. But I think people kind of need to be aware that these things, as cool as they are, they're definitely no 5-star crash rating vehicles. So yeah, when you're looking at a K car, keep that in mind. Those of you with a keen eye may have noticed that the car has historic number plates on it. For anyone who's, I guess, outside of Australia or New South Wales even, the historic or H plates, or in this case a J plate, basically denotes that the vehicle is on limited use registration. And the club that I'm in, it's a logbook based club, so what that means is effectively you can drive it openly for whatever you like to do for 60 days a year, but one of the conditions is that you do need to fill out the logbook every time you're driving the car. And it's a nice little book now. There used to just be a sheet of paper that would get scrunched up and look like a bit of trash after about 10 uses, but this year they've brought out an actual nice little logbook that almost looks like a passport. So yeah, you fill all that out with all your details, and every time you drive it, you keep it in the glove box. I deliberately fill it out, leave it in the glove box shut. The New South Wales police do audit those sort of things, so if you're driving around your car on H plates, pretty much expect to be pulled over at some point and be asked to present your logbook. They're pretty tight on not filling it out, because unfortunately there's people that roll the system and drive historic vehicles daily, which is fine. Like, I'm happy to see the cars on the road, but you do need to be mindful that we've been given these sort of schemes to allow vehicles like this to be on the road without having to pay $1,000-$1,200 a year worth of rego and stamp duty and CTPs and all those sort of things. So yeah, I guess if you're going to put a car on historic or the modified scheme, which is a similar version but for modified cars, just respect the system. By all means, if you got 5 cars and you can work out that you can drive one a day and sort of shuffle them around, go nuts. But yeah, I think people just need to be mindful that it is something that could potentially be taken away. So yeah, just respect the system. So many good chats. John's gonna love all the editing of this.
Yep.
bit of belt squeak. Might need to put some belts on it with a towing belt. This is the worst intersection ever. Oh, now someone's turning right, so we gotta wait for them. Hurry up. Okay, we're both gonna get out of here. Come on, John. Weep. Something cool that I picked up actually after buying the car before it got here was one of these original sales brochures. Unfortunately, this thing's actually very recently got water damage, which I've only discovered this morning, so I'm not stoked about. But this is an original sales brochure for a Rex 660. This is actually the fun top model, so it's not the exact car that we've got, but it's got some pretty amazing original photos. Something I kind of only just clicked to is I believe the Rex was actually the first car that Subaru did in this cashmere yellow. So a lot of you guys who probably kicked around playing the original Gran Turismo and Gran Turismo 2 would have remembered the Legacy BG5, sorry. The GTB would have been in cashmere yellow. Also, I think the STI version 4 that was on Gran Turismo was also in the cashmere yellow. So pretty cool to kind of put all those pieces together and go, oh, cool, that colour was actually originally for this car, because this car came out in 1989, 1990, in that kind of era. So yeah, a good 5 years before that colour was seen on any other Subaru. The grille, I need that grille. I like the asymmetricalness of it. So 90s. I like how the photographer clearly forgot to take a photo of the wing on the yellow car. So it's like, oh look, this one's white, but don't worry about it, it's still good. I'm actually surprised, being Japanese, that they didn't actually take that photo again from the yellow car, because literally every other photo in this brochure is the yellow car, and then just that one photo is a white car.
Your mic's doing the beard.
Your mic's doing the beard thing. It's worth actually mentioning with these cars too that very similar to Marty's L210 Mira all-wheel drive, you could get these things in all-wheel drive as well, and you could actually also get this particular model via Subaru with an electronic CVT. So it's probably one of the first e-CVTs that would have come to market as well. Subaru have done CVTs in some form since the 60s in heaps of tiny little micro cars. So it's cool to see that kind of technology flow through to this. And then even in today, Subaru are still offering CVTs in some of their models. So it's pretty cool to see that some of the technology from, well, realistically, this car came to market in 1990. So the technology would have been developed in 84, 85 at a rough guess. So yeah, cool to see that sort of stuff filter through to tiny little K cars, and then even today still be in use. So over, 33 years later nearly, we're seeing the same technology still creeping through into cars today. Rex. VX. Mark as given as evidence of superiority. Well, that pretty much wraps us up for today. Really want to thank you guys again for continually supporting the channel. I'm super stoked to be able to bring these sorts of cars to you guys. It's something a little bit different. I've had a lot of these Subaru K cars over the years, and finding an actual genuine Japanese domestic model in Japan was pretty cool. These are super rare in Japan now. The Vivio, which is the next model after this, they're still sort of on the ground, but to find a genuine supercharged Rex that was a 5-speed manual front-wheel drive, we were actually all pretty surprised to even come by it. So yeah, super stoked to actually have it here. Next episode, we're going to be working on this thing again, giving it a bit of a freshen up, doing a bit of service work, changing the towing belt, and sort of addressing some of the issues that have popped up with it, like the headlight combination switch is busted. So a few of those things we're going to sort out next episode. But for now, we'll pack it up. Thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you next time. Now that it's nice and hot, we can go and work on it.